Alright guys, welcome back to Formula 1 News. Lewis Hamilton not a happy man following the Monaco Grand Prix, with Ferrari drama again on the radio, and the relationship with Riccardo Adami, his race engineer, becoming increasingly strained it seems during the course of this Grand Prix, and certainly going into the rest of the season. Makes you wonder what Vettel was going through for all those years in the team, but big drama around the Monaco Grand Prix in general, major discussions of what may need to change in the future, given these changes this weekend did not necessarily yield the desired results. Very much into your thoughts in the comments, hit the like button if you enjoy, subscribe if you're new as always, I'd greatly appreciate it. Wow, we have had a weekend here in Dallas, and again, the video's rather later than I would like, but nonetheless, we've got lots to talk about this evening, and many of it will be relevant for the coming days anyway. Monaco was interesting. This is Alex Dunn slamming it into the side of Turn 1. Victor Martin was not a happy man here at Monaco Formula 2, because all of a sudden there was a massive pile-up at Turn 1, but the Grand Prix gets underway. We saw a couple of drivers start on the soft, and that was pretty clear what they were likely to do, certainly Yuki Tsunoda. Again, Red Bull had some interesting strategies. I will just quickly say before I forget, the race was such that if Yuki Tsunoda just accidentally sent it into the barriers at the end of the race, then, you know, we could have had a very different winner today. And that is definitely a talking point here at Monaco still. The race gets underway, Lando gets a good enough launch, he has a massive lock-up into Turn 1, but the cars have got so much downforce, and even though his tyres were cooked, kind of, didn't really matter, it's Monaco. You can drive 4 seconds off the pace and it's fine. We even saw that with Behrman. He literally pitted at the start of the race, had a terrible pit stop, was on the harder tyres and was lapping 4 seconds a lap faster than the leaders. This is Monaco, baby. This is pretty funny. Bortoleto into the wall, Antonelli got overtaken at the Lowe's hairpin, then sent one down the inside into the tunnel, and Bortoleto, I guess, tried to hold it around the outside. Ambitious, let's say, not especially effective. Gasly had a bit of an incident. He broke a bit late. Tsunoda moved over to the right-hand side. You know, I think it was kind of Gasly's fault, really. Look, if you're Gasly, you've just got to recognise that overtaking is not possible, so just accept it. Unfortunately, is the reality here. This was the moment that he had into Tsunoda, his old teammate, of course, and very good friend, down into the Nouvelle chicane. But look, 16 laps in, it was business as usual. Hadjar had pitted because Lawson was pulling off a masterclass. Now, was it really a masterclass, or is it just how it is? Because if you've got two teammates near each other, the strategy at Monaco is simply get your other teammate to hold up the field by 4 seconds a lap for about 5-6 laps, and that puts them 20 seconds, and then you've got a pit stop gap. And then you can take a free pit stop, and then take another free pit stop, and go on to get a great result. That's what Racing Bulls executed. They did it well. Lawson played his part. They both scored some solid points. Russell and Antonelli couldn't do so because they were so far down the pecking order, but I feel like they should have tried something, right? At least Russell and Antonelli should have split strategies, because both doing the same thing was a disaster of an idea, and it was never going to be a good idea to have both your drivers doing the same terrible strategy, right? Like, at least taking a risk with one of them. They didn't. They got caught in the Albon train, and it was an absolute shambles, really. Now, at this point in the race, 21 laps in, Hadjar had already 2 stopped, and that put him in a real interesting position. Alonso was up into 6th at the time. Hamilton did pretty well in the pit stop phase to actually overcut some of those guys and end up in 5th, so he was kind of the big mover, really, in many respects. But Racing Bulls played it quite well, but this was a mandated 2-stop race. Tsunoda pitted after the first lap. The leaders, of course, stayed out because, you know, if you pit too early, you run so much risk, really. There was some debate whether they should mandate pitting on a certain lap or something, but yeah, that's not what happened in the end. But lap 24, Piastri boxed, didn't really work out for him, and he was saying, okay, like, where do we go now? Verstappen was leading, but of course hadn't yet pitted, and it was a very interesting race on some level, because there was always this whole jeopardy in the air around a safety car, around a red flag. If somebody crashed and there was a red flag, then if you were mandated to 2-stop, or, well, if you were mandated to use 3 compounds of tyres, then a red flag would have meant Verstappen won the race at the end. Do feel terrible for Fernando Alonso because his car conked out again. It does seem like that Mercedes engine, various engines have had some overheating issues, and I don't know, man. Alonso said last time out he was the unluckiest driver in the world. He was on to score good points today for Aston Martin for the first time, and it all came crumbling down, nothing of his own doing. The big drama really during the race itself was actually around Russell. So Russell went past Albon by going off the road. Whether that was intentional or not, let's be real, you know, I'm sure there was a part to play in that, because he was stuck behind Albon and he was like, well, if I go past him and take a 10-second penalty, that's actually worth it. The stewards decided that actually around Monaco, they weren't going to accept that, and they were going to mandate a drive-through penalty, which is what Russell did. After the race, Russell said, look, I was just here to have a bit of a good time. Russell said he prefers not to speak. Look, the race for Mercedes was kind of settled on the Saturday, but even then, you've got to think they could have done a better job, right? I mean, Antonelli was fuming, he wasn't even responding. He finished Antonelli like 3 laps down, it was an absolute shambles. They didn't even do any pit stops until the end of the race, so I just don't know what they were thinking. Like, they got a drive-through penalty. The cars are a disaster. Bono comes on the radio and says, look, well done, Kimi, you're a good team player. But yeah, Mercedes just continue to be absolutely horrific around Monaco. That's not changed. But Lando Norris, in the end, wins the Grand Prix. And this is crucial for the championship, right? Like Lando versus Piastri versus Max. The fact that Lando executed well, okay, turn 1 was a bit, tricky for a time, but he got through it. And after that, commanded the race, set the fastest lap as well by a mile, just to prove that he had so much left in the tank at the end of that Grand Prix. Charles Leclerc did really well. He tried everything. Max tried everything as well, backing up Norris into Leclerc. But the result was pretty inevitable outside of a mysterious red flag at the end of the Grand Prix. Piastri comes 3rd. Hamilton did reasonably well to get to 5th. I think, honestly, like, the first into the race was pretty big for him. Isaac Hadjar came 6th. Ocon 7th. Lawson 8th. Albon and Sainz both get a point in 9th and 10th at the end of the Grand Prix as well. But the big drama was around Lewis Hamilton. So, well, really, I mean, again, it's this Ferrari race engineer drama that continues to be the case. So, during the Grand Prix, Hamilton was asking a couple of questions. He was first requested early on in the race to, basically he was told, this is our race. And that was when there was a pit stop window opening up and they needed Hamilton to do some fast laps. Now, Hamilton didn't really understand what that meant. This is our race. So what does that mean? Am I, what am I doing? Am I going for the win here, right? Am I trying to overtake the guy in front? Am I trying to fend off the guy behind? Like, what does this is our race mean other than just push, effectively, which is kind of what he did, and it worked. But, Hamilton wasn't really sure what this is our race was meant to mean in that moment, and we'll see his explanation of that in a second. And at the end of the race, Hamilton was, the way they pitted him, it didn't really matter in the end. But maybe Hamilton could have been a threat to Verstappen and Piastri, but they pitted him into traffic a couple of times, and Hamilton's pace wasn't great, but you know how Hamilton is. Like, if he's got no race, he's not going to push that hard, and especially around Monaco, you can't really afford to push that hard. What's the point? So, he's 40 seconds off where he needed to be. So he chilled until the end of the Grand Prix. But he asked his engineer, Riccardo Adami, during the race, like, am I still a minute behind? And his engineer just told him about the tyres and the guys at the front of the grid, and he was like, well, yeah, great, but I didn't ask you that, right? Like, am I a minute behind or am I not? And he said, okay, you're 48 seconds off the lead right now. And at the end of the race, he comes on the radio and basically says, look, are you upset with me or something? Because, he didn't really respond and there was no response in the garage. Now, this is interesting, right? So he made this comment when he was in the tunnel. Now, people were saying, oh, maybe, you didn't hear it because it's in the tunnel. I don't think that's an issue for these Formula 1 cars. Maybe it is, but I'm pretty sure that they can still get the radio regardless. I'm pretty sure. Now, maybe I'm wrong about that. But because Giuliano De Kester says that actually, no, he probably did hear, but he was just looking at a data streak. He was, effectively distracted and didn't hear Hamilton's comments. Okay, fine, great, fair enough. But it's definitely interesting because Hamilton asked a question. He comes on the radio and says, you're not answering my question. It doesn't really matter, but like, I'd like to know because I asked you a question. And he didn't answer me. And at the end of the race, he then says, like, is everything good, right? Like, I tried my best. And then he doesn't get a response. So, Ferrari, again, the execution on the weekends, despite having a decent car, was certainly suboptimal, as we see here in Q1. Hamilton was somewhat compromised in Q3. Okay, like, they needed to make sure they got through Q1, but, nonetheless, it wasn't optimal. Obviously, the wrong info during the Grand Prix qualifying session, which ended up in Hamilton getting a penalty, was a big deal. Lost loads of time in traffic. Terrible work, as people are describing it as. And Hamilton, after the fact, was, pretty confused. He talked about a few things and said he wasn't really sure what his engineer was getting at. The information wasn't exactly that clear. Very interesting the way that Hamilton says this, because it's clearly trying to be quite cordial and not saying anything too provocative. But equally, it's pretty clear that he's not very happy with the way that these things have been handled. And he says, look, I didn't understand what that meant, this is our race. Didn't know what I was fighting for. When I looked at the data, I wasn't anywhere near any of those guys. Going on to say that I just didn't, it's the same comment. Didn't really understand it. The information was simply not clear. And, he comments about the other parts of the race as well and says that I can't really comment on the rest of the race. I was simply stuck in no man's land, needed the safety car, but it didn't happen. But, comments from Hamilton about his engineer, again, raise good questions because the last few Grand Prix weekends have been difficult, let's say, in that relationship. and it doesn't seem like they're really meshing well at all. I don't know, like, Hamilton's gone from Bono to dealing with this, and it must be frustrating because he's not sure what the guy is saying, what he's getting told. I mean, after he got penalised for the penalty in qualifying for the Verstappen incident, that might have been enough for Hamilton to say something serious, and then the race today was not even more of a disaster, but was similarly problematic in many respects. So I think Hamilton will definitely be having some thoughts and some words with the team behind the scenes about where they go from here, because of course publicly he's not going to throw his race engineer under the bus, and it's not like his engineer cost him massively today, but he certainly did yesterday in terms of championship results. And I'm sure, a guy of Hamilton's calibre, certainly someone who's been there and done it and won world championships with a phenomenal race engineering partnership, will know full well what Ferrari may or may not need to change in that department. The other big drama really was just around the concept in general, the two-stop race that was mandated. Albon says, look, it was ugly, right? Because we were just driving around, holding up the cars behind, having a massive train, and there's nothing you can do about it, because if you go fast enough through the final corner, you're going to get the job done regardless. And Verstappen says, look, the 2 mandatory pit stops didn't work. What could work? Maybe pitting in a window, right, to guarantee that, okay, you've got to pit on a certain number of laps, so you can't do any, cheese with it. Maybe, but Max says, then we're almost doing Mario Kart. Then we have to instill bits on the car. Maybe you can throw bananas around, slippery surface, maybe turn on the sprinklers, I don't know. Look, at the end of the day, I like Monaco, kind of. Qualifying is a great session, but I don't really think nowadays it matters what you do. The race is always kind of going to be like this. Not to say that today on some level wasn't kind of fascinating to see what the teams would do, but once it settled in, it was very dull. And, you're seeing people play a game. Brundle made this point that what you really want to see maybe is, guys pushing flat outs, right, on the absolute limit. But it's not what's happening, right? You're seeing people play games the entire Grand Prix. It doesn't really feel like the pinnacle of motorsport. Totally understand that perspective. But at the end of the day, there was still some jeopardy, right? Like, if a red flag had happened at the end of the Grand Prix, Verstappen would have got a free tyre change, and that would have been it. He would have won the race. So, it could have happened, right? There was potentially, even to the last couple of laps, there was the potential that was still there because of this pit stop drama that happens. It was also an interesting rule that if you didn't pit, you just got yourself a 30-second penalty rather than anything else. That's typically, usually that doesn't happen, right? Like, if you don't pit at the end of the race, like, disqualification and stuff can be on the table. But here, if you didn't pit, you just got a 30-second penalty. And Red Bull took advantage of that. They basically said, all right, Max, you're going to stay out forever. And if we lose, whatever. But if we don't, then we get the free penalty, we get the free pit stop, and it works. So, like, Red Bull tried their best. It made things kind of compelling. But as Max says, it doesn't matter what you do here. It doesn't matter what you do. First, 1 stop, 10 stops, whatever. It's still going to be the same type of result. So Verstappen goes from winning in Imola to not being on the podium. So his streak of going podium, non-podium, podium, etc. continues. And then it's Barcelona. And a couple of key things to note here. The main one I want to look at, of course, is the Drivers' Championship standings as it stands. Piastri still leads the championship by 3 points over Lando Norris. Lando's at 158, so it's all to play for. The last time a McLaren driver won a title, he won Monaco. And, Norris has won Monaco, so that was Hamilton, of course. So we'll see. But I think a big weekend for Lando to get back on track here, proving some pace, executing well. And I think he'll take a lot of confidence out of this weekend. That championship gap is nothing, is it? Verstappen is 25 points behind Piastri at the top of the championship. Now, going into Spain, you guys remember the talking point that going into Spain, Red Bull wanted the gap to be within 25 points. They felt like if they were within 25, max of the leader, going into Spain, then the changes to the flexible wings and all this stuff would put them in a position to maybe still push to win the championship. Max is exactly a race win behind where Piastri is. So it's still very compelling at the front. Max, good damage limitation given the circumstances. For Red Bull, Yuki, of course, didn't score any points. Hadjar gets up into the top 10 in the championship, which is particularly impressive. The Ferrari guys are slowly climbing their way back up, but it's obviously still not exactly ideal right now. But very much intrigued to your thoughts in the comments. Long day for me. I'll be back tomorrow. Of course, we've got more to talk about around this Grand Prix in the future, so quicker video than normal, but I hope you guys appreciated it whenever you're watching. Regardless, hit the like button if you enjoyed, subscribe if you're new, take care, and I'll see you next time.